The stars had always been a promise to humanity, a vast and beautiful frontier waiting to be explored, waiting to welcome them into something greater than themselves. By the year 2018-87, that promise had begun to take shape in small and fragile ways. A colony on Proxima b, research stations on Mars and Titan, and the first awkward conversations with alien civilizations who looked upon humans the way adults look upon toddlers stumbling into a room full of strangers. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of 42 elder species, had acknowledged humanity with a polite nod and little else, classifying them as a developing curiosity and assigning them the lowest diplomatic status possible, one step above wildlife. And humanity had accepted this with patience, because they believed the galaxy was a place of reason, a place where civilizations talked before they fought, a place where the strong protected the weak. World orbiting a star near Proxima b, a planet the humans had never visited and did not even know existed. A Vorhan's sacred breeding ground, hidden behind classification codes that no one had shared with the newcomers. The Vorhan Dominion was one of the oldest and most feared members of the Concord, a reptilian empire built on conquest, ritual, and the absolute belief that their bloodline was sacred above all others. When human survey drones accidentally passed through the orbital space of that hidden world, the Vorhan did not send a warning, did not file a complaint, did not ask for an apology. Instead, High Commander Sethric stood before the Vorhan War Council and spoke a single sentence that sealed the fate of billions. The contamination must be purged. Within 6 days, the Vorhan assembled a purification fleet of 9,000 warships, sleek and dark and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust like an eggshell. Message to the Galactic Concord before departing: we cleanse, do not interfere. And the Concord, those 42 wise and ancient civilizations, did nothing. The Solani archivists filed a formal objection that nobody read. The Dotheri philosophers issued a statement of deep concern, and the rest simply looked away. Because Earth was small, and the Vorhan were powerful, and it was easier to let a quiet world die than to risk a war over creatures who had barely learned to leave their own star. The fleet arrived in the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. There was no ultimatum, no demand for surrender, no chance to speak or plead or explain. The first volleys struck New York City at 6:47 in the morning, a lance of superheated plasma that fell from orbit like the finger of an angry god. And in less than 3 seconds, 8 million lives ended in a flash of white light that could be seen from space. Then came London, then Beijing, Delhi, then Lagos, then Sao Paulo, then Tokyo, then Moscow, city after city after city, each one erased with mechanical precision as if someone were crossing names off a list. The oceans boiled along the coastlines, the atmosphere filled with ash so thick it blocked out the sun, and the screams of billions rose and then fell silent in a wave that rolled across the planet like a tide. It took 72 hours. In 72 hours, the Vorhan killed 4,700,000,000 human beings, men and women and children who had never held a weapon, who had never threatened anyone, who had simply been alive in the wrong place at the wrong time, in a universe that did not care about them. The survivors, those who had been underground, those who had been lucky, those who had been in the deep places of the earth when the fire came, crawled from their shelters into a world that no longer existed. The sky was black, not the black of night, black of burning, a thick and choking darkness that smelled of ash and death and the end of everything. And the Vorhan did not even stay to watch. They left behind a network of automated sentinel drones, cold and patient machines that orbited the ruined planet and scanned for signs of organized life, programmed to report if the vermin showed any signs of recovery. High Commander Sethric recorded a message for the Concord archives as his fleet departed the system. The human contamination has been addressed. The matter is closed. Let the record show that the Dominion acted with appropriate force and restraint. Restraint. He called it restraint. Across the galaxy, the elder species received this message and did what they had always done. They noted it, filed it, and moved on to the next item on their agenda. But deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in a bunker that had been built during humanity's old Cold War and expanded over the centuries into a fortress carved from the bones of the mountain itself, something was happening that the Vorhan had not planned for. 300 people sat in a room lit by the cold blue glow of geothermal generators. Military officers, scientists, engineers, doctors, and a handful of politicians who had survived only because they had been touring the facility when the sky caught fire. They were filthy and exhausted, and many of them were still shaking, some from cold, some from shock, and some from a rage so deep it had no name. At the front of the room stood General Marin Ashcroft, a tall woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that looked like they had been emptied out and filled with something harder than grief. She had lost her husband in the first strike on London. She had lost her daughter in the firestorms that followed. She had lost her home, her country, her world. And she had not yet allowed herself to cry, because crying was a luxury that belonged to people who had. She looked at the faces before her, the last leaders of a broken species, and she saw in their eyes the same thing she felt in her own chest, a fury so vast it could swallow stars. The room was silent, except for the hum of the generators and the distant rumble of a planet still dying above them. Ashcroft opened her mouth and spoke 5 words. 5 words that would be carved into monuments and whispered by children and remembered long after the stars themselves went dark. Civilization ends. We fight back. No one cheered. No one clapped, because this was not a moment for celebration. This was a vow, spoken in the dark, beneath the ruins of everything they had ever loved. A vow made not with hope, but with teeth. And somewhere above them, orbiting in the ash-choked sky, the Vorhan Sentinel drones continued their quiet watch, scanning, recording, waiting for humanity to finish dying. 7 years. That is how long humanity stayed silent. 7 years of darkness beneath the surface of a ruined world. 7 years of digging and building and mourning and planning. 7 years in which the galaxy forgot about them entirely, the way one forgets about an insect crushed beneath a boot. But insects do not build warships. Roughly 800 million humans had survived the burning, scattered across underground bunker networks beneath the Alps and the Rockies and the Urals, deep inside abandoned mining complexes in South Africa and Chile, sealed within submarine habitats, drifting beneath the dark waters of the Pacific, and clinging to life on the small and overlooked outposts on Mars, Titan, and a handful of asteroid stations that the Vorhan had dismissed as insignificant. They were hungry, and they were broken, and they had nothing left except each other, and a rage that burned hotter than the plasma that had destroyed their cities. First months after the burning, chaos nearly consumed what remained. Food riots in the European bunker network, a power struggle between 3 surviving military commanders in North America, and a wave of suicides so terrible that the psychologists who tracked it simply stopped counting because the numbers were too painful to read. It was General Marin Ashcroft who held them together, not with speeches or promises, but with a simple and brutal truth that she repeated to every surviving community she could reach through the underground communication lines. Grief is a luxury, rage is a resource, and we will waste neither. Within 6 months, she was elected Supreme Commander of the Unified Remnant by a vote that was nearly unanimous. Not because people loved her, but because she was the only leader who seemed to have a plan beyond simple survival. And she did have a plan. She called it the Doctrine of Teeth, and she explained it to her war council in a sentence that left no room for argument. Every human alive is now a weapon. Every resource is a bullet. Every breath we take is an act of war. The first task was to understand the enemy, and for that, they needed the Sentinel drones. Captain Yuki Tanaka, a naval officer who had survived the destruction of the Pacific Fleet by being 300 meters underwater when the strikes hit, led the first capture mission herself. Her team climbed through the irradiated ruins of what had once been Zurich, wearing suits cobbled together from hazmat gear and old radiation shielding. And they brought down a Vorhan Sentinel drone using an electromagnetic pulse device built from parts scavenged from a destroyed power station. They dragged the drone underground like hunters, carrying a kill back to their cave. And within hours, every surviving scientist in the European network was tearing it apart. What they found inside changed everything. Technology was advanced, far beyond anything humanity had built. But it was not mysterious, not magical, not incomprehensible. It was engineering. And humans understood engineering the way fish understand water. Dr. Amara Osei, a physicist who had been working on fusion reactors before the burning, stared at the drone's power core for 3 days straight without sleeping. And on the fourth day, she looked up at her colleagues with red-rimmed eyes and said something that would be quoted in history books for centuries. They are not smarter than us, they just had more time, and time is something we can steal. She was right. Within 18 months, human scientists had reverse-engineered the drone's null-point energy system, a method of drawing power from the quantum vacuum itself, and they had done something the Vorhan engineers had never imagined possible. They had made it smaller. The Vorhan version required a chamber the size of a building. Version fit inside a space the size of a shipping container. Because humans did not have the luxury of building big, so they built clever instead. From there, the breakthroughs came fast, driven not by curiosity, but by fury. Each discovery fueled by the memory of burning cities and the knowledge that somewhere out there, the creatures who had murdered 5 billion people were sleeping peacefully. Phase shift armor came next, a system that forced matter to flicker between dimensional states so rapidly that energy weapons passed through it like light through glass. The Vorhan had a crude version of this technology, but had never perfected it because they had never needed to, because no one had ever pushed them hard enough to try. Humans pushed. Then came the Wrath drives, and these were something entirely new. Every species in the Galactic Concord used some version of fold space travel to cross the vast distances between stars. Like folding a piece of paper, it was elegant and safe and reliable. The Wrath drive was none of those things. Human engineers, working in cramped underground labs with stolen alien technology and their own desperate genius, built a drive system that did not fold space but tore through it, ripping a hole in the fabric of reality and throwing the ship through the wound before it could heal. It was violent and unstable, and the energy signature it produced was so chaotic that it blinded every sensor within a light year, and it was fast, terrifyingly fast, faster than anything the Concorde had ever seen. The Concorde species had built their drives for comfort and safety. Humans built theirs for ambush. While the scientists worked, the engineers built ships. Not beautiful ships, not the sleek and graceful vessels that the elder species flew. These were ugly things, brutal and angular, welded together in underground caverns from whatever materials could be found or manufactured. They were painted black, not for stealth, but because there was no time or reason to paint them any other color. They were armed with weapons that mixed human ingenuity with stolen alien technology. Railguns that fired slugs at a fraction of the speed of light. Null-point warheads that could create miniature singularities on impact. And simple nuclear missiles, because sometimes the old ways worked best. 1,200 ships, that was all they could build in 7 years with the resources they had. 1,200 ships, crewed by volunteers who had nothing left to lose. Men and women who had watched their families die, who had buried their children in irradiated soil, who had spent 7 years underground eating recycled protein and breathing recycled air, and dreaming every single night of the moment they would finally rise. The Vorhan had 9,000 warships in their home fleet alone, and the full Concorde could field hundreds of thousands more. 1,200 against the galaxy, and not one human aboard those ships expected to survive. They did not care. On the day the Black Fleet was finally ready, Commander Ashcroft walked through the main hangar carved beneath the Alps, a cavern so large it had its own weather. And she looked at the rows of dark ships standing like silent soldiers, waiting for an order. Captain Tanaka met her at the base of the flagship, the URS Remembrance, a heavy cruiser that was the largest ship in the fleet, and still smaller than the smallest Vorhan destroyer. "The crews are aboard," Tanaka said. "All volunteers, every one of them." Ashcroft nodded and looked at Tanaka's face, scarred from radiation burns, thin from years of rationed food, but with eyes that held a fire no amount of suffering had been able to put out. "Are you afraid?" Ashcroft asked. Tanaka considered the question for a moment. "I was afraid the day they burned Tokyo. I was afraid for months afterward. But fear is like fuel, Commander. Eventually you burn through it, and all that is left is the engine." Ashcroft almost smiled. Almost. She climbed aboard the Remembrance and walked to the bridge, where 30 crew members sat at their stations in silence, each one wearing a black uniform with a single patch on the shoulder, a blue circle representing Earth, crossed by a red line representing what had been done to it. She looked at them, scarred and thin and hard-eyed and ready. "They think we are dead," she said, and her voice carried through the ship, and through every ship in the fleet, broadcast on every channel. "They burned our world and left machines to watch us die, and for 7 years we let them believe it worked. But we are not dead. We were never dead. We were just getting ready." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet and cold and absolute. "Let us introduce ourselves." The hangar doors opened, and the Black Fleet rose from the grave of Earth like a swarm of dark and furious ghosts. And the stars, for the first time in 7 years, looked down upon human ships. The galaxy did not know it yet, but everything was about to change. The Vorhan border colony of Thraxis Prime was a quiet place, a military outpost orbiting a red dwarf star at the edge of Dominion space, home to 40 warships, a fuel depot, and roughly 200,000 Vorhan soldiers and their families. It was a Tuesday, or what passed for a Tuesday in Vorhan timekeeping, and the garrison commander was reviewing a supply report when every sensor in the system went blind at the same time. The screens did not flicker or fade. They simply filled with static, as if reality itself had screamed. 3 seconds later, the Black Fleet arrived. They came through tears in space that burned with a light no Vorhan scientist had ever seen. Holes ripped in the fabric of the universe by drives that should not have existed, built by a species that should not have survived. The Vorhan garrison commander had exactly enough time to open a communication channel before the first railgun slug tore through his ship from bow to stern, a rod of tungsten moving at 60,000 kilometers per second that turned 3 decks into vapor and silenced him forever. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 11 minutes. Human ships moved through the Vorhan formation like wolves through a flock of startled birds, fast and coordinated and utterly without mercy. Their phase-shift armor flickering like dark mirages as Vorhan weapons fire passed through them and struck nothing. Captain Yuki Tanaka commanded the destroyer wing, 8 fast ships that swept around the flanks of the Vorhan formation and cut off any vessel that tried to run, and she did this with a calm precision that terrified even her own crew. "No one leaves," she said over the tactical channel. "They did not let anyone leave Earth. We return the courtesy." When it was over, 40 Vorhan warships drifted in pieces through the void, their hulls cracked open like eggs, their crews dead or dying in the void. Cold vacuum, and the fuel depot was a spreading cloud of superheated gas that glowed against the darkness like a new and angry star. The Black Fleet did not stay. They did not land troops, did not occupy the colony, did not even transmit a message. They simply vanished back into their Wrath Drive tunnels and were gone before the light of the explosion had finished reaching the outer planets. But they left something behind. On every communication channel in the system, military and civilian alike, a recording began to play on a loop. Footage captured by human satellites during the burning of Earth, the cities exploding one by one like flowers of fire, the oceans steaming, the clouds turning black with ash, and beneath the footage, a single line of text in the Vorhan language. "We remember." The news reached the Vorhan homeworld within hours, and for the first time in living memory, the halls of the Dominion War Council were filled not with confidence, but with confusion. "This is impossible," said Fleet Admiral Karath, staring at the tactical report as if the numbers on it were written in a language she could not read. "The humans are extinct. Our sentinels confirmed extinction-level casualties. There is no scenario in which they could have built a military force capable of this." But the wreckage of 40 warships said otherwise. High Commander Sethric, the same officer who had ordered the purification 7 years earlier, stood at the window of the War Council chamber and said nothing for a long time. He had expected this moment, not this specific moment, not this specific attack, but the feeling, the cold certainty that something had gone very wrong. He had felt it growing in his chest ever since the day he gave the order to burn Earth and watch the planet's oceans boil from orbit. He had told himself it was necessary. He had told himself it was justified. And for 7 years, the silence from Saul had seemed to prove him right. Now the silence was over, and it was loud. Over the next 14 months, humanity waged a campaign unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Not a war of conquest or territory, but a war of ghosts, striking from nowhere, disappearing into nothing, leaving behind only wreckage and that same terrible recording. They hit the Vorhan supply depot at Kesra, destroying 6 months of fuel reserves in a single raid that lasted less than 20 minutes. They hit the shipyard at Vorhan's Reach, emerging from Wrath Drive directly inside the construction zone, and unleashing a storm of null-point warheads that collapsed 3 half-built dreadnoughts into crumpled metal and dust. They hit the communication relay at Setharis, cutting off the entire Vorhan western frontier from command for 11 days. And they did it with decoys, thousands and thousands of decoys, cheap unmanned drones that broadcast the same energy signatures as capital ships, making 1,200 vessels look like 50,000 on every scanner in the sector. The Vorhan did not know where to defend, because they did not know where the humans were, and they did not know how many humans there were, because their instruments told them impossible numbers that grew larger with every engagement. Fear, real fear, the kind that crawls into the bones and makes strong hands shake, spread through the Vorhan military like a disease. Soldiers who had never questioned their superiority began to hesitate. Officers who had laughed at the idea of a human threat began to argue with each other. And on the frontier worlds, civilians began to whisper a question that no Vorhan had asked in 10,000 years. What if we lose? The Galactic Concord watched all of this with growing alarm. An emergency session was convened at the Concord Central Assembly, a vast floating station at the heart of the galaxy, where representatives of the 42 elder species gathered to discuss matters of cosmic importance and generally accomplish nothing. The debate was fierce and divided. The Korvathi, an avian species known for their rigid adherence to tradition, demanded that the Concord intervene against humanity, calling them a feral species lashing out without regard for galactic stability. The Methrani, crystalline beings who communicated through vibrations, proposed sanctions against both the Vorhan and the humans, a suggestion so uselessly balanced that it satisfied no one. And the Solani, the insectoid archivists, who had quietly filed a formal objection to the burning 7 years ago, the objection that nobody read, sat in silence and watched with their hundreds of compound eyes, and if anyone had looked closely, they might have seen something in those alien faces that looked very much like satisfaction. It was the Solani archivist Chivix who broke protocol, standing in the assembly chamber without being recognized, and speaking words that sent a shudder through every delegate present. "We watched," Chivix said, and his voice was the dry rustle of insect wings. "We watched them burn, and we did nothing. Every species in this chamber carries the ash of Earth on their hands, and now we are surprised that the survivors are angry. We are not victims of human aggression. We are witnesses to the consequence of our own cowardice." The chamber erupted. 3 species walked out. 2 filed formal complaints, and the Korvathi ambassador called Chivix a traitor to galactic civilization. But Chivix did not care, because he had already made his choice. In secret, through channels so deeply encrypted that even the Concord's best intelligence agents could not trace them, Chivix had been feeding information to the humans for over a year. Fleet positions, defense codes, patrol schedules, and most importantly, a complete map of the Vorhan home system's defensive grid. He did this not because he loved humanity. He did this because he had read the archives of 1,000 civilizations that had been wiped out by the strong while the Concord did nothing. And he had decided that this time, for the first time, someone would help. Humanity received all of this intelligence with grim gratitude. They sent a single diplomatic transmission to the full Concord assembly. Commander Ashcroft's face appeared on every screen, scarred and hard, and carrying the weight of 5 billion dead behind her eyes. "You watched us burn," she said. "You said nothing. You did nothing. Some of you approved. Remember that when you decide whose side to take, because we are coming for the ones who did this to us. And when we are done, we will remember who stood with us and who stood aside." The transmission ended. In the War Council of the Vorhan Dominion, High Commander Sethric watched the recording 3 times, and on the 3rd viewing, he turned to his aide and whispered a question that contained more fear than any words he had ever spoken. "What have we awakened?" His aide had no answer, because the truth was too large and too terrible to fit inside a single sentence. They had awakened humanity, and humanity was no longer afraid. No species had attacked the Vorhan homeworld in 10,000 years. Not because it could not be done, but because no one had ever been desperate enough, or angry enough, or reckless enough to try. Humanity was all 3. The intelligence from Archivist Chivix had given them everything they needed: the layout of the Vorhan home system, the positions of 22,000 warships arranged in layered defensive rings around the planet, the locations of orbital defense platforms that could crack a moon in half, and most importantly, the gaps, the tiny imperfections in the formation where confidence had replaced caution, because the Vorhan had never truly believed anyone would come. Commander Ashcroft studied the data for 3 weeks, barely sleeping, barely eating, surrounded by tactical officers who ran simulation after simulation and arrived at the same conclusion every time. "We cannot win this fight," said Colonel Henrik Voss, her chief strategist, man who had lost both legs in the burning and now walked on prosthetics built from salvaged drone parts. "We have 1,100 ships remaining. They have 22,000. The mathematics do not allow for victory." Ashcroft looked at him with those hard and empty eyes and said, Then we changed the mathematics. She called it the Prometheus Gambit, and when she explained it to her senior officers, half of them went pale, and the other half smiled in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. The plan was this: 200 unmanned ships, empty hulls loaded with null-point reactors, rigged to overload, would be launched through Wrath Drive, directly into the center of the Vorhan defensive formation. When null-point reactors overloaded, they did not simply explode. They tore holes in space-time itself, creating brief and violent singularities that crushed everything nearby into nothing. It was not a weapon any sane civilization would use. The effects were unpredictable, and the collateral damage was catastrophic, and there was a very real chance it could destroy the attacking fleet as easily as the defenders. But humanity was not feeling particularly sane. On the morning of the attack, if morning meant anything in the darkness of deep space, Ashcroft stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. "This is the day," she said. "Some of us will not survive it. Most of us probably will not survive it. But I need you to understand something before we begin." She paused, and in that pause, 1,100 ships held their breath. "We are not here to destroy them. We are here to show them, and the entire galaxy, what happens when you try to erase a species that refuses to be erased. We are here because 5 billion people are dead, and someone has to answer for that. And we are here because if we do not go, then everything we built in the dark, everything we sacrificed, every friend we buried, and every tear we swallowed, means nothing." She took a breath. "So we go, and whatever happens on the other side, know that you are the finest and bravest and most stubborn people who have ever lived. And I am honored to fly with you." Captain Tanaka, aboard her destroyer, the URS Wrath, replied on an open channel, "We are with you, Commander, to the end and past it." And then, one by one, every ship in the fleet transmitted the same 2 words: "With you." The Black Fleet engaged its Wrath Drives, and reality screamed. They emerged in the Vorhan home system like a storm breaking through a wall. The energy discharge from 1,100 simultaneous Wrath Drive exits, blinding every sensor platform in the outer defense ring, and sending waves of electromagnetic chaos rolling across the system like a tsunami. And in the heart of that chaos, the Prometheus ships arrived. Materialized directly inside the Vorhan inner formation, surrounded on all sides by warships and defense platforms, and the accumulated military power of 10,000 years of dominance. The Vorhan had exactly 4 seconds to realize what was happening. Then the reactors overloaded. Space itself cracked. 200 points of impossible gravity bloomed like black flowers in the void, pulling warships apart like paper, crushing defense platforms into specks of compressed matter, and creating a zone of absolute destruction that swallowed everything within 1,000 kilometers of each detonation. The Vorhan lost 3,000 ships in the first 10 seconds, simply gone, as if they had never existed. Erased not by fire or force, but by the fundamental laws of physics being twisted into weapons by a species that had nothing left to lose. And through the gap, through the screaming, burning wound torn in the heart of the Vorhan formation, fleet charged. What followed was the largest space battle in the recorded history of the galaxy, and it raged for 9 days. 9 days of constant fighting, of ships ramming ships, of railgun slugs tearing through hulls, of null-point warheads blooming in silent flashes of annihilation, of human pilots flying damaged ships directly into Vorhan formations, because ejection meant surrender, and surrender was not a word they recognized anymore. The Vorhan fought with everything they had, and they fought well, because whatever else they were warriors. But they fought the way they had always fought, with formations and protocols and centuries of doctrine that told them exactly how a battle was supposed to go. The humans fought the way cornered animals fight, with teeth and claws and a fury that no amount of training could replicate, because it came not from discipline, but from grief. Captain Tanaka's destroyer wing became legendary during the siege. 8 ships that moved through the battle like a blade through water, striking weak points in the Vorhan line and vanishing before the counterattack could form. And when the URS Fury lost its engines on the 6th day, its crew manually aimed the ship at a Vorhan carrier and rowed it all the way down, singing an old song from home over the open channel as the 2 vessels merged in a ball of fire. On the 7th day, the Vorhan Fleet Admiral Karath ordered a full retreat to the orbital defense grid, pulling what remained of her fleet, roughly 14,000 ships, into a tight shell around the planet itself, using the defense platforms as anchors. Ashcroft saw the move and understood what it meant. The Vorhan were no longer trying to win. They were trying to survive. She had lost 460 ships, nearly half her fleet, and every remaining vessel was damaged in some way, burned, cracked, leaking atmosphere, running on backup systems. Willpower. But they had broken the Vorhan Navy, shattered the most powerful military force in the galaxy against the rock of human fury. And now the homeworld lay before them. And here, at this moment, in this place, with the power to end a civilization burning in her hands, Marin Ashcroft made the choice that defined not just the war, but the entire future of humanity's place among the stars. She could glass Vorha. She had the weapons, she had the position, and she had every moral justification the universe could offer. 5 billion dead, a world burned to ash, a genocide carried out while 42 civilizations watched and did nothing. Every tactical officer on the Remembrance expected the order. Some of them wanted it so badly they could taste it. Ashcroft opened a channel, not to her fleet, but to the planet below. Broadcast on every frequency, translated into every Vorhan dialect, sent to every screen and speaker on the surface. Commander Marin Ashcroft of the United Remnant of Earth, she said, and her voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking beneath the console where no one could see. We could do to you what you did to us. We could burn your cities, boil your seas, kill your children, while the galaxy watches and does nothing. We have earned that right with the blood of 5 billion people who never did you any harm. She paused. But we are not you. We will never be you. The bridge was silent, every officer frozen, some with tears on their faces, some with jaws clenched in disagreement, all of them listening. You will live, Ashcroft continued, not because you deserve mercy, but because we refuse to become the thing we are fighting. You will live, and you will carry this moment with you forever. The moment when humanity had the power to end you and chose to let you stand. Carry that debt, teach your children about it, remember it every time you look at the stars. The voice faded into the quiet hum of the ship. Sky and sea are ships passing overhead. She closed the channel. On the surface of Vora, billions of Vorhan had been watching the battle through their screens. Watching their fleet shatter, watching their defenses fail, watching the dark human ships close in around their world like a fist. And they had prepared themselves for the fire they knew was coming because it was exactly what they would have done. When the fire did not come, when instead they heard the voice of a woman offering them the one thing they had never offered her, something broke inside the Vorhan Dominion that could never be repaired. Within days, the government collapsed. High Commander Sethric was arrested by his own officers, and the Dominion fractured into factions that blamed each other for the catastrophe. On the bridge of the Remembrance, Ashcroft finally sat down, her legs giving out beneath her as if the strings holding her up had been cut. Commander, are you all right? She looked up, and for the first time in 9 years, her eyes were not hard or empty. They were just tired and sad and human. No, she said, I will never be all right. but they will live. That has to be enough. 1 year after the Siege of Vorha, the Galactic Concord did something it had never done in its 12,000-year history. It sent an invitation, not out of courtesy or tradition, but out of fear. The invitation was addressed to the united remnant of Earth, and it was written in the most formal diplomatic language the Concord possessed. Every phrase carefully chosen, every word polished, offering humanity full sovereign membership as an equal among the 42 elder species. Several delegations had privately lobbied for something even greater, a classification known as apex species, a title given only 3 times in the entire recorded history of galactic civilization, reserved for those whose power and influence reshaped the order of all things. The invitation arrived at the Remnant's temporary command center, a facility built into the caverns beneath what had once been Geneva, and Commander Ashcroft read it once, set it down on the table, and looked at the man sitting across from her. His name was Dr. Kofi Asante, and he was perhaps the most unlikely ambassador any species had ever sent to represent them before the powers of the galaxy. He was 63 years old, thin and quiet, with deep brown skin marked by scars from radiation burns that traced pale lines across the left side of his face. He walked with a cane because his left leg had never fully healed after being trapped under rubble for 2 days in a collapsed mine shaft in Ghana, where he had taken shelter with 47 students when the burning came. Before the burning, he had been a professor of philosophy and ethics at the University of Accra, a man who spent his days thinking about justice and morality and the obligations that civilizations owe to one another. Questions that had seemed academic and abstract until the day the sky turned to fire and made them the most important questions in the universe. He had not sought the role of ambassador. Ashcroft had chosen him, and when he asked her why, she had given him an answer he never forgot. Because we need someone who can explain to the galaxy not just what we can do, but what we choose not to do. And you are the only person I know who can make them understand why that matters more. Now he sat in a quiet room, reading the Concord's invitation, and when he finished, he looked up at Ashcroft and shook his head slowly. "They are offering us a seat at a table that was set while we burned," he said. "I think we should build our own table." Ashcroft almost smiled. "That is exactly what I was hoping you would say." 3 weeks later, Dr. Kofi Asante walked into the Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Concord, a space so vast that clouds formed near the ceiling, designed to make every species feel small before the collective weight of galactic civilization. He felt small. He was small, by any measure the galaxy used, a limping human with a cane, wearing a simple dark suit, representing a species that had been nearly wiped from existence less than a decade ago. The chamber was full. Representatives of all 42 member species were present, along with observers from a dozen non-member civilizations. Thousands of alien beings watching from tiered galleries that rose like cliffs on every side. The silence when he reached the speaker's platform was absolute. Not respectful silence, but the silence of a room full of creatures who did not know whether to be afraid or ashamed or both. Asante set his cane against the podium, adjusted the universal translator on his collar, and spoke in a voice that was quiet and steady and carried to every corner of that enormous chamber. "You are afraid of us," he began. "Good, you should be." The silence deepened. "Not because we are strong, though we have proven that we are. Not because we are clever, though I believe we have demonstrated that as well. You should be afraid because you showed us what the galaxy truly is." He paused and looked across the chamber, meeting alien eyes that blinked and flickered and shifted in ways no human could fully read. But he did not need to read them to know what they were feeling. A place where 42 civilizations can watch a world burn and do nothing. A place where the strong do as they please and the weak die quietly. And the archives record it all with perfect indifference. That is the galaxy you built. That is the order you maintained, and 5 billion of my people paid the price for it. A murmur rippled through the chamber, not of protest, but of discomfort, the sound of a wound being pressed. We received your invitation, Asante continued, your offer of membership, your seat at this table. And I want you to understand that we considered it carefully, because we are not a reckless people, despite what the last 2 years might suggest. Sounds that might have been alien laughter. But we must decline. A murmur became a roar. Delegates rising, translators crackling with overlapping voices. And Asante waited with the patience of a man who had spent 2 days buried alive, and learned that panic was a waste of energy. When the noise subsided, he continued, Humanity does not seek a seat at your table, because your table was built on a foundation we cannot accept, a foundation of silence and complicity, and the quiet agreement that some species matter and some do not. He straightened, and despite his cane, despite his scars, despite the fact that he was one fragile human standing before the assembled power of a galaxy, he seemed in that moment to be the tallest thing in the room. We are building a new table, and any species that believes civilizations should be protected, not purged, sheltered, not ignored, defended, not quietly allowed to die, is welcome to sit with us. Reached into his pocket and produced a small data chip, and he placed it on the podium with a click that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. This is the New Dawn Doctrine, the founding charter of a new alliance, open to any species willing to commit to 3 principles. He held up one finger. First, no species, regardless of power, may commit genocide without consequence. Never again will a civilization burn while the galaxy watches. A second finger. Second, any species facing extinction-level aggression may call upon the New Dawn Compact for immediate military defense. Not a debate, not a committee, not a vote that takes 6 months while people die. Immediate defense. A third finger. Third, humanity will patrol the borders of the weak and the forgotten, the species you have overlooked, the civilizations you have classified as insignificant, the worlds you would let burn because they are too small to matter. They matter to us, because we were once them. He lowered his hand. You do not have to join us. You do not have to agree with us, but know this, the galaxy you built, the one where silence is acceptable and complicity is tradition, that galaxy is over, whether you like it or not. Things have changed, because we changed them, because we refused to die the way you expected us to. He picked up his cane and stepped back from the podium. That is all I have to say. The silence that followed lasted a full 30 seconds, an eternity in a chamber full of politicians. And then from the upper gallery, a sound began. It was the Solani delegation, Archivist Chivix and his entire team, producing a vibration with their wings that was the Solani equivalent of applause. A deep and resonant hum that filled the chamber like a heartbeat. The Dotheri joined next, their aquatic tanks glowing with bioluminescent patterns that signaled profound agreement. The mammalian species from the outer rim, who had themselves been nearly conquered twice, and the Gellion, a fungal collective that had been ignored by the Concord for centuries, and one by one, 12 delegations rose and added their voices to the sound. 12 species left the Galactic Concord that day and signed the New Dawn Compact before the week was over, and within a year, 7 more followed. The old Concord did not collapse, but it diminished, hollowed out from within, by the knowledge that its greatest failure had created its greatest rival, and the species who remained looked at each other across their ancient chamber and wondered if the table they sat at still meant anything. Humanity went home, and they began to rebuild. The skies above Earth cleared slowly. Year by year, the ash thinned, and the sun returned, pale at first, and then stronger. And on the surface, where cities had once stood, new cities rose. They were not the same cities, were not built to be the same, because the people who built them were not the same people who had lived before. Every new city had a wall of names at its center, massive structures of black stone engraved with the name of every person confirmed lost in the burning. And the walls were never finished because new names were still being found in the records, still being remembered by survivors who woke in the night with a face or a voice they had forgotten. Children grew up in these cities, children born after the burning, who had never seen the old world, and they learned two things above all else: what was taken from them and what they chose not to take from others. They learned about the fire, and they learned about the mercy, and they understood, even the youngest of them, that the second was harder than the first. 20 years after the siege of Vorha, the Solani archivist Chivix, now old, his wings faded to a pale silver, published the definitive account of the human Vorhan. It was translated into every language in the galaxy, read by billions of beings across thousands of worlds, studied in academies, and debated in councils, and whispered about in the quiet places where ordinary people wondered about the nature of courage. The final line of that account became the most quoted sentence in galactic literature, carved into monuments on 100 worlds, taught to children of species that had never met a human, repeated so often that it became less a sentence and more a truth. In the annals of galactic civilization, many species have demonstrated the capacity for war. Many have demonstrated the capacity for vengeance. But only one species, broken and burned and left for dead, crawled from the ashes, with fury in one hand and mercy in the other. The galaxy did not know what humanity was until it tried to destroy them. Now it knows, and it will never forget. And far away, on a healing earth, beneath skies that were finally blue again, a woman named Marin Ashcroft sat on a bench in a garden that had been planted over the ruins of Geneva. She was old now, her hair white, her hands still, and she watched children playing in the grass between the flowers, laughing in a language that sounded like the future. She did not smile. She had never quite relearned how. But something in her chest that had been clenched like a fist for 20 years finally loosened, just a little. It was not peace, not exactly, but it was close enough. And above her, in the clear and open sky, human ships passed silently among the stars, watching, guarding, remembering, carrying the light of a species that had been burned to nothing and refused to stay dark. The galaxy had tried to end them. It had failed.